I didn't lose my life all at once. I handed it over slowly, without noticing, like spare change left on a counter day after day. So little at a time that it never felt like theft. If you had asked me who I was, I would have answered confidently. My name. My role. My responsibilities. I had facts. What I didn't have was myself. I used to believe identity was something solid, something you discover. I didn't realize it was also something you can quietly give away. It started with small things. Choosing what was expected instead of what felt true. Saying yes because no would require explanation. Adjusting my tone, my opinions, my reactions, just enough to make situations smoother. I told myself this was maturity. Compromise. Social intelligence. And maybe at first, it was. But over time, compromise stopped being a choice and became a reflex. I learned how to read rooms before speaking. How to anticipate reactions. How to become the version of myself that made others comfortable. People liked me. That should have felt reassuring. Instead, it slowly hollowed me out. I don't remember the exact moment I stopped checking in with myself. I just know that at some point, my inner voice became quieter than everyone else's expectations. I stopped asking what I wanted. Then I stopped noticing that I had stopped asking. Life kept moving. Milestones happened. Decisions were made. Plans unfolded. From the outside, it looked like progress. From the inside, it felt like watching someone else live. I was present, but not inhabiting my life. There were moments when discomfort surfaced, sudden, sharp, impossible to ignore. A comment that landed too close to the truth. A stranger's life that triggered an unexpected ache. A question like, "Are you happy?" asked too casually. I brushed those moments away quickly. I was good at that. I told myself everyone feels disconnected sometimes. That dissatisfaction is normal. That meaning comes later. Later became my favorite word. Later I'll figure it out. Later I'll change things. Later I'll feel more like myself. Later is a dangerous place. Because it feels responsible, but it asks nothing of you now. I lived for a long time in a strange emotional state, not unhappy, not fulfilled. Functional. I woke up, did what was required, went to bed. Repeated. Days blended together, not because they were bad, but because none of them belonged to me. I remember sitting alone one evening, doing absolutely nothing, when a thought appeared so clearly it startled me: if I disappeared tomorrow, this life would continue almost unchanged. That realization wasn't dramatic. It was devastating. Not because I felt unimportant, but because I felt replaceable in my own existence. I wasn't irreplaceable to myself. That's when I started paying attention. To how often I felt drained after social interactions. To how relief followed cancellation more often than disappointment. To how my body relaxed only when I was alone and didn't have to perform. I realized something uncomfortable: I wasn't tired from doing too much. I was tired from being someone I wasn't. The scariest part was that no one forced this on me. No one demanded I shrink. No one explicitly told me who to be. I volunteered. Because being adaptable felt safer than being honest. Because honesty risked conflict. Judgment. Loss. So I chose invisibility over authenticity, not consciously, but consistently. And consistency builds identity. One day, I looked at my life and felt a quiet panic. Not fear of failure. Fear of permanence. What if this was it? What if this version of me, muted, accommodating, slightly absent, was the one that lasted? That thought followed me everywhere. In conversations, I barely listened to. In decisions, I felt detached from. In moments that should have mattered more than they did. I started to understand that my problem wasn't dissatisfaction. It was misalignment. I was living a life shaped by expectations I had internalized so deeply that they felt like my own. But they weren't. And the longer I lived that way, the harder it became to remember who I was before. I didn't need a new life. I needed my own back. Once I admitted, even silently, that I wasn't living my own life, everything started to unravel. Not outwardly. Outwardly, nothing changed. The same routines. The same conversations. The same obligations that kept me moving from one day to the next. But inside, a quiet panic settled in. Because once you recognize misalignment, you can't unsee it. Every decision I made felt borrowed. Every agreement felt like a small betrayal. Every smile felt slightly delayed, like it belonged to someone else. I began noticing how often I checked my reactions before expressing them. Not what do I feel, but what reaction is expected here? That question ran my life. It explained why I felt exhausted after ordinary interactions. Why silence felt like relief. Why I avoided situations where I might be asked personal questions. Personal questions require personal answers. And I didn't know which answers were actually mine anymore. At night, when everything slowed down, the thoughts became unavoidable. When was the last time you made a decision without imagining how it would look to others? When did you stop trusting your own instincts? Who benefits from the version of you that keeps showing up? The answers were uncomfortable. I benefited from safety. Others benefited from my compliance. No one benefited from my disappearance, except the expectations that depended on it. I wasn't living someone else's life because they forced me to. I was living it because it was easier than confronting the uncertainty of my own. That truth hurt more than blame ever could. I saw how often I used responsibility as a shield. I can't change things now. It's too complicated. Other people depend on me. Some of that was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. The deeper truth was simpler. I was afraid of what would happen if I stopped being predictable. Predictability had become my currency. People knew what to expect from me. I knew what was expected of me. That mutual understanding created stability, but at a cost. The cost was curiosity. Spontaneity. Desire. I began to grieve things I hadn't officially lost. The version of me that spoke without rehearsing. The one that felt excited instead of cautious. The one that believed discomfort meant growth, not danger. I remembered how I used to imagine my future. Not in detail, just in feeling. It used to feel open. Now it felt decided. That sense of inevitability was suffocating. One evening, I caught myself thinking, at least this life makes sense. And immediately after, since when did making sense replace feeling alive? That question refused to leave me alone. I started to see how deeply I had internalized other people's definitions of success, maturity, and happiness. I had absorbed them without questioning whether they matched my own values. Over time, those definitions became rules. Rules I followed even when they cost me everything internal. There was a moment, subtle, but decisive, when I realized something terrifying: if I didn't intervene, this life would keep going indefinitely. Not because it was good, but because it was functional. Functionality is dangerous that way. It doesn't demand change. It rewards endurance. I was being rewarded for my disappearance. And the longer I stayed invisible, the harder it felt to imagine reclaiming space. The moral dilemma became clear. To stay meant continuing a life that looked coherent but felt empty, slowly disconnecting from myself until there was nothing left to reclaim. To leave, emotionally, structurally, existentially, meant disruption. Confusion. Disappointment. Loss. Not just for others, for the version of me that believed loyalty meant self-erasure. Neither option was painless. But only one allowed honesty. I noticed how my body reacted when I imagined choosing differently. Fear, yes. But also something else. Energy. A sharp, almost forgotten sensation of aliveness. When I imagined staying, there was only heaviness. That contrast told me more than any logical argument ever could. Fear wasn't the enemy. Numbness was. I didn't announce anything. Didn't make declarations. I started with quiet resistance. I paused before agreeing. I let silence exist instead of filling it. I allowed myself to disappoint people in small ways. Each moment felt dangerous. And nothing terrible happened. The world didn't collapse when I hesitated. Relationships didn't instantly shatter when I stopped over-explaining. What cracked was the illusion that my disappearance was necessary. And once that illusion broke, the life I was living began to feel increasingly uninhabitable. Because it depended on a version of me that no longer existed. I wasn't sure yet what my own life would look like. But I knew this one was no longer sustainable. The realization settled in quietly, without drama. I could continue living someone else's life. Or I could risk everything to find my own. And for the first time in years, not choosing felt more dangerous than choosing wrong. The moment I stopped cooperating with the life I was living, everything inside me went quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Honest quiet. The kind that follows a long lie when you finally stop repeating it. I didn't announce a change. I didn't reinvent myself overnight. I didn't walk away dramatically. What I did instead was far more unsettling. I stayed, but differently. I stopped offering versions of myself that weren't real. Stopped smoothing my edges to keep situations comfortable. Stopped answering questions automatically. And people noticed. Not right away. But slowly, in the pauses. In the moments where I didn't rush to reassure. In the conversations where I didn't volunteer explanations. In the decisions where I didn't justify myself. Some people leaned in, curious. Others leaned away, uncomfortable. A few reacted with irritation, as if my new silence accused them of something. That's when I understood a painful truth: the version of me they loved depended on my disappearance. Not because they were cruel. But because that version made their lives easier. And I had helped create it. Letting that go felt like grief. Not just grief for relationships that shifted or faded, but grief for the years I spent believing that being liked was the same as being seen. I had confused acceptance with alignment. Acceptance asks you to fit in. Alignment asks you to exist. Alignment is harder. It doesn't guarantee approval. It doesn't promise stability. It often comes with loneliness at first. There were days I questioned myself deeply. Days when I wondered if I was being selfish. If I had misread everything. If this discomfort meant I was making a mistake. But then I compared two sensations. The discomfort of change. And the numbness of staying. Only one of them felt alive. I realized something that still unsettles me: you don't need to actively destroy yourself to disappear. You just need to keep choosing what's expected over what's true. That's how it happens. Quietly. Politely. Responsibly. I had done everything right. And still lost myself. So I stopped asking whether I was making the right choice. That question kept me frozen. Instead, I asked something simpler, something harder: am I present in this moment? If the answer was no, I paid attention. Presence became my compass. Not happiness. Not certainty. Presence. Some days, choosing my own life meant walking away from conversations halfway through. Some days, it meant disappointing people I cared about. Some days, it meant sitting alone with the discomfort of not knowing what comes next. But even on the loneliest days, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: ownership. My life was no longer something happening to me. It was something I was participating in again. I don't romanticize this change. There are still moments of doubt. Moments where the old reflex to disappear tries to return. It whispers familiar things: be easier. Don't make this complicated. Go back to what worked. And sometimes, I feel the pull. But now I recognize it. That voice isn't wisdom. It's fear dressed as responsibility. I still grieve the time I lost. The years spent living someone else's life so convincingly that I almost forgot it wasn't mine. But regret doesn't control me anymore. It teaches me. It reminds me that I am not obligated to continue a life just because I once agreed to it. Especially if that agreement required my silence. If you're listening to this and something inside you feels uncomfortably familiar, the quiet exhaustion, the sense of watching yourself from a distance, the fear of permanence, this is what I want you to hear: you don't need a crisis to justify reclaiming yourself. You don't need permission to want a life that feels inhabited. And you don't need to disappear to start over. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stop living on autopilot. I realized too late that I was living someone else's life. But not too late to stop. This life I'm building now isn't perfect. It's uncertain. It's quieter in some ways, louder in others. But it doesn't require me to vanish. And for the first time, when I ask myself who I am, the answer doesn't feel borrowed. It feels present. And that, finally, is enough.